The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the marble floor as I adjusted my black blazer one final time. The maitre d' was reading from his leather-bound reservation book, his voice echoing through the elegant dining room of Meridian Heights, the most exclusive restaurant in downtown Chicago. Table 12, VIP section, reservation under the name Madison Clark. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My father's face went completely white. After 23 years of telling me I'd never amount to anything more than a waitress, he was about to discover exactly what his daughter had become. Growing up in the blue-collar neighborhood of Bridgeport, our house was where dreams went to die. My father, Robert Clark, worked double shifts at the steel mill and came home every night with grease under his fingernails and disappointment etched in the lines around his eyes. My mother, Sarah, had given up her teaching dreams to raise 3 kids, and by the time I was old enough to understand, the spark in her eyes had long since faded. I was the middle child, sandwiched between my older brother Jake, who followed Dad straight into the mill after high school, and my younger sister Emma, who everyone agreed was the pretty one destined to marry well. Me? I was just Madison, the stubborn one who asked too many questions and had ideas above her station. You think you're better than us? Dad would snap whenever I mentioned college brochures or talked about the business articles I'd read at the library. Your grandmother was a waitress, your Aunt Linda's a waitress, and that's good, honest work. But you? You think you're going to be some big shot in a suit? The fights always followed the same pattern. I'd mention wanting to study business or economics, and he'd launch into his speech about knowing your place in the world. The Clarks aren't college people, Madison. We work with our hands. We don't put on airs. But something inside me burned every time he said it. Maybe it was watching my mother fold laundry for other people's families to make ends meet. Or seeing Jake come home with the same defeated look Dad wore. I knew there had to be more than this cycle of getting by, paycheck to paycheck. When I turned 16, I got my first job at Rosie's Diner on the South Side. It was exactly the kind of place Dad expected me to work forever. Red vinyl booths, a jukebox that only played songs from the 70s, and coffee that could strip paint. The owner, Frank Kowalski, was a gruff man in his 60s who'd inherited the place from his father. You're a natural, Frank told me after my first week. Got the right attitude for service work. I smiled and thanked him, but inside I was taking notes on everything. How the morning rush worked, why certain tables turned over faster than others, what made customers choose one item over another. I started tracking the daily sales figures in a notebook I kept hidden in my locker. Dad was pleased when I brought home my first paycheck. See? Told you you'd find your calling. Good tips in the service industry if you work hard and don't get too big for your britches. But I wasn't content just serving coffee and taking orders. During my lunch breaks, I'd walk through the business district downtown, watching people in sharp suits hurrying between meetings, carrying briefcases and talking on phones about deals and mergers. I wondered what it would feel like to be one of them, to have people seek out your opinion instead of your coffee refills. The library became my second home. I devoured business magazines, case studies, anything I could find about entrepreneurship and restaurant management. I learned about profit margins, supply chain optimization, customer retention strategies. The librarian, Mrs. Chen, started setting aside the newest Harvard Business Review issues for me. At home, I tried sharing what I'd learned. Did you know that most restaurants fail because they don't understand their food costs? I said one evening over dinner. If you calculate the exact cost proportion and factor in labor and overhead, you can determine the optimal menu pricing to maximize. Madison. Dad's fork clattered against his plate. Nobody wants to hear your fancy theories. You're 17 years old, working at a diner. Stay in your lane. But Dad, what if there's a better way to... What if? He shook his head. You know what your problem is? You think reading some magazine makes you smarter than people who've been working their whole lives? Frank's been running that diner for 30 years. You think he needs some high school kid telling him how to do his job? Emma giggled from across the table. Madison thinks she's going to be a CEO or something. Quote, The day Madison Clark runs anything more than a coffee pot, Dad said with a bitter laugh, is the day I eat my work boots. That night, lying in my narrow bed in the room I shared with Emma, I made a promise to myself. I was going to prove him wrong. Not just wrong, spectacularly wrong. I started small. At Rosie's, I began suggesting little improvements to Frank. What if we offered a lunch special that used ingredients we already had in different combinations? What if we rearranged the counter setup to reduce the steps between coffee machine and tables? Frank was skeptical at first, but when my suggestions started increasing efficiency and customer satisfaction, he began listening. You got a head for this stuff, kid, he admitted after I showed him how tracking customer preferences could help predict daily orders. Maybe you should think about restaurant management school or something. Restaurant management school. The word sparked something in me, but I knew better than to mention it at home. Instead, I started researching programs in secret, learning about culinary institutes and hospitality management degrees. The costs were staggering, more money than my family had ever seen at one time. So I did what I always did. I found another way. I picked up extra shifts at Rosie's and started working weekends at a catering company downtown. The owner, Patricia Williams, ran high-end events for corporate clients and wealthy families. She paid better than the diner, but more importantly, she exposed me to a completely different world. These people spend more on wine for one dinner party than most families spend on groceries in a month, Patricia explained as we set up for a pharmaceutical company's board meeting. But that's not what matters. What matters is understanding what they value and making sure they get it flawlessly. I watched how Patricia managed her staff, coordinated with vendors, handled last-minute changes with grace. I saw how she transformed simple ingredients into elegant presentations, how she anticipated needs before clients even expressed them. This wasn't just about serving food, it was about creating experiences. The pharmaceutical executives barely noticed me as I refilled their water glasses and cleared their plates, but I was absorbing everything. Their conversations about market expansion, competitive analysis, strategic partnerships, the way they evaluated proposals, made decisions, commanded respect. You're different from my usual servers, Patricia observed one evening as we cleaned up after a charity gala. You're not just going through the motions. You're studying everything. She was right. Every event was a masterclass in business operations, client relations, and leadership. I started volunteering to help with planning and logistics, not just service. Patricia began teaching me about cost analysis, vendor negotiations, event design. Meanwhile, at home, the tension was growing thicker. Dad's comments about my delusions of grandeur became more frequent and cutting. He'd make jokes about my fancy ideas in front of neighbors and relatives, always with that edge of mockery that made my cheeks burn. Madison's gonna be the next Donald Trump, he'd say when Uncle Mike came over for Sunday dinner. Gonna build a business empire right from Rosie's diner. Jake would laugh along, but I caught him watching me sometimes with something that might have been curiosity. Emma just rolled her eyes, more interested in her boyfriend of the week than family dynamics. Mom stayed quiet during these exchanges, but I'd see her expression, a mixture of worry and something else I couldn't quite identify. Hope, maybe? Or fear that I was setting myself up for disappointment the way she had. The breaking point came during my senior year of high school. I'd been accepted to the University of Illinois with a partial scholarship, planning to study business administration. The remaining tuition would require loans and continued work, but it was possible. I'd run the numbers a dozen times. I chose a Sunday dinner to tell them, thinking the family setting would soften the blow. I got into UIC, I announced, trying to keep my voice steady. Business program. I can work part-time and take out loans for the rest. The silence stretched for what felt like hours. Dad's jaw worked like he was chewing something tough. College, he finally said. My daughter wants to go to college. Dad, I know it's a lot of money, but I've worked it out. I won't need any help from you and Mom. I can do this on my own. Oh, you can do it on your own. He set down his fork with deliberate precision. Just like that. 4 years of playing pretend that you're something you're not, racking up debt for some piece of paper that'll get you the same job you can get right now. It's not the same job, Dad. With a business degree, I could... You could what? Manage a Wendy's instead of working at one? Run a restaurant instead of waiting tables? His voice was rising now. You know what you are, Madison? You're a waitress. That's what you've always been, and that's what you'll always be. And there's nothing wrong with that, but stop pretending you're going to be something you're not. The words hit like physical blows. Emma was staring at her plate, and Jake was shifting uncomfortably in his chair. Mom's knuckles were white where she gripped her napkin. Maybe I am just a waitress, I said quietly, standing up from the table. But maybe that's not all I am. Where are you going? Mom asked as I grabbed my jacket. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. To work, I replied. To be what I am. But as I walked through the cold Chicago night, toward downtown, toward Patricia's catering company where I had an evening event, I was already planning. Dad thought he knew who I was and what I was capable of. He saw a waitress and couldn't imagine anything beyond that. He was about to learn how wrong he was. The catering event that night was for Blackstone Financial, one of Chicago's premier investment firms. As I arranged appetizers on silver platters, I overheard conversations about market volatility, acquisition strategies, and venture capital deals. The executives moved through the room with quiet confidence, making decisions worth millions while I refilled their champagne glasses. One executive, David Hartman, noticed me listening intently to their discussion about restaurant chains and emerging markets. You seem interested in our conversation, he said during a brief lull. Studying business? Not yet, I replied carefully, but I hope to be. He smiled. Smart. The hospitality industry is undergoing massive disruption. Traditional models are being challenged by technology, changing consumer preferences, demographic shifts. There's real opportunity for innovative thinking. That conversation planted a seed. Over the following weeks, I researched everything I could about restaurant industry trends, technology integration, and market analysis. I discovered that several successful entrepreneurs had started in service positions before building their empires. Howard Schultz had worked as a salesperson before transforming Starbucks. Ray Kroc was a milkshake machine salesman before creating the McDonald's system. But research wouldn't pay for college. I needed a concrete plan. I approached Frank at Rosie's with a proposal. What if I could increase your profits by 15% without raising prices or cutting staff? Frank looked skeptical. How? I pulled out the detailed analysis I'd prepared. I've been tracking our patterns for months. We're losing money on inefficient processes, poor inventory management, and missed opportunities for upselling. I can fix that. And what do you want in return? A percentage of the increased profits, enough to help pay for college. Frank studied my charts and projections. After 3 days of consideration, he agreed to a trial period. If I could deliver on my promises, he'd give me 5% of any profit increases I generated. I threw myself into optimizing every aspect of Rosie's operations. I restructured the kitchen workflow to reduce food waste, implemented a simple point-of-sale system that tracked popular items and slow movers, and trained the staff on suggestive selling techniques. I negotiated better rates with suppliers by consolidating orders and establishing consistent purchasing schedules. Within 2 months, Frank's profits had increased by 18%. I don't know how you did it, he said, handing me my first profit-sharing check. But keep doing it. Word spread quietly through the local restaurant community. Other small business owners began asking for my help with efficiency problems, inventory management, and cost reduction. I started consulting part-time, building a small but growing client base of diners, cafes, and family restaurants. At home, I kept my growing success quiet. Dad had made it clear that any mention of my business activities would trigger another lecture about knowing my place. But the money was adding up, and college was becoming a real possibility. Patricia noticed the change in my confidence during catering events. You're carrying yourself differently, she observed as we set up for a tech company's product launch. Something's shifted. She was right. Every successful project built my credibility and expanded my network. The catering clients began asking for my input on operational challenges. A software startup wanted advice on their office kitchen setup. A law firm needed help reorganizing their break room service to improve productivity. "You've got something special," Patricia said one evening after a particularly successful event. "Have you thought about starting your own consulting business?" The idea was tempting, but I knew I needed formal education to be taken seriously in larger markets. My high school credentials and street experience could only take me so far. That's when I met Vincent Morrison. Vincent was the regional director for Meridian Restaurant Group, which owned 12 upscale establishments across the Midwest. He'd hired Patricia's catering for a board dinner, and I was assigned to serve the private dining room where the executives were discussing expansion strategies. "The Chicago market is saturated," one board member was saying. "We need differentiation, not just another high-end restaurant." "Customer experience is everything," Vincent replied. "But most operators focus on food and ambiance while ignoring operational excellence. The restaurants that thrive long-term master both the front and back of house." I couldn't help myself. During a brief pause as I refilled water glasses, I spoke up. "Have you considered implementing dynamic pricing models based on demand forecasting?" The room went quiet. Vincent turned to look at me. "Excuse me?" Heat rushed to my cheeks, but I pressed on. "Airlines and hotels use sophisticated algorithms to optimize pricing based on demand patterns, seasonal trends, and capacity utilization. Restaurants typically use static pricing, but there's opportunity for revenue optimization through strategic price adjustments during peak and off-peak periods." One of the board members chuckled. "Our server has opinions about revenue management." But Vincent was studying me intently. "Go on." "Most restaurants lose money during slow periods because they can't reduce fixed costs like rent and labor. But if you could predict demand patterns and adjust pricing to smooth out peaks and valleys, you'd maximize both capacity utilization and profit margins. A 10% price reduction during typically slow Tuesday afternoons might increase volume by 30%, resulting in higher overall revenue and better staff utilization." Vincent exchanged glances with his colleagues. "Where did you learn about revenue optimization?" "Research," I said simply, "and observation." After the dinner ended, Vincent approached me privately. "I'd like to talk to you about a position with our company." My heart raced. "What kind of position?" "Management trainee. We're looking for people with natural business instincts and operational thinking. Formal education is preferred but not required for exceptional candidates." The offer was everything I'd dreamed of. A chance to enter the restaurant industry at a management level, working with sophisticated operations and learning from experienced professionals. The starting salary was more than I'd ever imagined earning. But there was a catch. The position required relocating to Milwaukee for an 18-month training program. I'd have to leave Chicago, leave my consulting clients, and postpone college indefinitely. I asked for time to consider the offer. That night, I sat in my shared bedroom, staring at the University of Illinois acceptance letter on my dresser. Two paths stretched before me. The traditional route through college that would provide credentials and theoretical knowledge, or the practical route through Meridian that would give me real experience and immediate income. Emma was at her boyfriend's house, so I had rare privacy to think. I pulled out my notebook and did what I always did when facing difficult decisions. I analyzed the options systematically. College would cost approximately $60,000 over 4 years, plus opportunity costs of lost income. I'd graduate with debt, but also with a degree that would open doors throughout the business world. The education would be broad-based, covering finance, marketing, operations, and strategy. Meridian offered immediate income, specific industry experience, and potential for rapid advancement, but it would limit my options to the restaurant industry and delay my formal education indefinitely. If the company culture wasn't a good fit, or if the restaurant industry faced major disruption, I could find myself trapped. I made a list of pros and cons, calculated financial projections, and considered long-term career implications. But ultimately, the decision came down to something simpler. Which path would better position me to prove Dad wrong? Dad saw me as just a waitress because he couldn't imagine me in any other context. College would give me credentials, but Meridian would give me real power and responsibility. In 18 months, I could be managing restaurants, making decisions that affected hundreds of employees and millions in revenue. The next morning, I called Vincent and accepted the position. When I told Patricia, she was thrilled. This is exactly the kind of opportunity you've been working toward. Vincent Morrison doesn't offer management trainee positions lightly. He sees something special in you. Frank was disappointed to lose me, but proud of my advancement. Always knew you had more ambition than Rosie's could handle. You'll do great things, kid. The hardest part was telling my family. I waited until Sunday dinner, when everyone was gathered around the table. Dad was in a good mood because the Bears had won their game, and Jake had just announced that his girlfriend was pregnant. I have some news too, I said during dessert. I got offered a management position with Meridian Restaurant Group. I start next month in Milwaukee. Quote, the silence was immediate and heavy. Management position, Dad repeated slowly. Doing what? Restaurant operations. Training program for 18 months, then management assignments. And you're taking this job? Yes. Dad set down his coffee cup. So you're giving up college for another waitressing job? It's not waitressing, Dad. It's management. Real responsibility, good salary, career advancement opportunities. Madison, he said with that familiar tone of disappointment, you can put whatever fancy title you want on it, but you're still going to be working in restaurants, dealing with food and customers. That's service industry work. That's what you've always done. Jake cleared his throat. Actually, Dad, management is different, if she's really running operations. Don't encourage her, Dad snapped. She's 21 years old. What does she know about managing anything? Maybe we'll find out, I said quietly. As I packed my belongings that week, preparing for Milwaukee, I thought about Vincent's words during our follow-up conversation. The restaurant industry is changing rapidly. We need managers who understand both traditional hospitality and modern business principles. You have that combination. Dad might see this as just another service job, but I knew better. This was my chance to build real expertise, real authority, real success. In 18 months, I'd have the experience and credibility to take on whatever challenges came next. And someday, somehow, I'd find a way to show Dad exactly what his just a waitress daughter had become. Milwaukee's corporate headquarters for Meridian Restaurant Group occupied 3 floors of a gleaming downtown tower. Walking through the lobby on my first day, I felt like I'd stepped into a different universe from Rosie's Diner and Patricia's Catering Kitchen. Everything was polished marble and brushed steel, with abstract art that probably cost more than my family's annual income. The management trainee program included 12 candidates from diverse backgrounds, recent MBA graduates, former military officers, experienced retail managers, and me. During introductions, I quickly realized I was the only one without a college degree, and the youngest by at least 3 years. Don't let it intimidate you, advised Marcus Chen, a former Navy logistics officer who became my closest ally in the program. Half these MBA types have never worked a day in actual operations. You've got real experience. Quote, our training covered everything from financial analysis and supply chain management to leadership psychology and brand development. We rotated through different departments, spending weeks with corporate accounting, marketing, human resources, and strategic planning. Each rotation revealed new layers of complexity in running a multi-million-dollar restaurant empire. The financial department was a revelation. I learned to read P&L statements, analyze cash flow patterns, and understand how seemingly small operational changes could impact profitability across dozens of locations. My experience optimizing Rosie's Diner had given me intuitive understanding, but now I was learning the sophisticated analytical tools used by major corporations. In marketing, I studied customer segmentation, brand positioning, and digital engagement strategies. The marketing director, Jessica Valdez, was impressed by my grassroots perspective on customer behavior. You understand something most marketers miss, she told me during a campaign planning session. You know what it feels like to serve customers directly, to see their reactions in real time. That insight is incredibly valuable. But it was the strategic planning rotation that truly opened my eyes to the scale of possibility in the restaurant industry. I worked with senior executives on market expansion plans, competitive analysis, and acquisition strategies. These weren't just restaurants. They were complex business systems with intricate moving parts. The training program's final project required each candidate to develop a comprehensive business plan for a new restaurant concept, complete with market analysis, financial projections, operational specifications, and marketing strategy. We had 6 weeks to complete the assignment, which would determine our placement within the company. While my classmates focused on trendy concepts like farm-to-table gastropubs or fusion cuisine lounges, I took a different approach. I'd noticed a gap in the market for high-quality, efficiently operated casual dining that could serve both business professionals and families without compromising on either speed or experience. My concept was called Summit in Maine, a restaurant designed around flexible service models that could adapt to different customer needs throughout the day. Business lunch service would feature pre-ordering technology and guaranteed 30-minute service. Evening service would slow down the pace, focusing on relaxed dining and conversation. The kitchen design, menu engineering, and staff training would all support this dual-purpose approach. The financial projections were solid, based on detailed analysis of comparable restaurants and careful cost modeling. But the real innovation was in the operational systems. Technology-enabled efficiency that didn't sacrifice the human touch that made dining experiences memorable. Vincent Morrison attended all the final presentations. When my turn came, I was nervous but prepared. I'd rehearsed the presentation dozens of times, anticipating questions and objections. "Interesting concept," Vincent said after I finished. "But you're essentially trying to be 2 different restaurants in one location. Won't that create operational complexity and confuse your brand identity?" "Not if the systems are designed properly," I replied. The menu uses modular components that can be assembled quickly for lunch service or plated more elaborately for dinner. The same ingredients, different presentations. Staff cross-training ensures flexibility, and the technology integration actually simplifies operations by providing real-time data on customer flow, inventory levels, and service timing. Another executive raised concerns about customer expectations. Business diners want speed and efficiency. Families want relaxation and attention. How do you satisfy both without disappointing either? I pulled up my customer journey analysis. By clearly communicating value propositions for different service periods and designing the physical space to support both experiences, the lunch crowd gets guaranteed speed and quality. The dinner crowd gets ambiance and personalized service, same kitchen, same core menu, different execution. After all presentations concluded, we waited 3 days for results. The tension among the trainees was palpable. These placements would determine our career trajectories within Meridian. Vincent called me into his office on a Thursday afternoon. "Your presentation was exceptional," he began. "The concept is innovative. The financial modeling is sophisticated, and your operational thinking is more advanced than many managers with years of experience." I felt a surge of pride, but Vincent wasn't finished. "However, I'm not placing you in a traditional restaurant management role." My heart sank. Had I misread something? Made a critical error? "Instead," Vincent continued, "I'm assigning you to our acquisitions team. We're expanding into new markets, and we need someone who can evaluate potential restaurant purchases, identify operational improvement opportunities, and develop integration strategies. Your combination of operational experience and analytical skills makes you perfect for this role." The acquisitions team was Meridian's elite unit, responsible for identifying and integrating new restaurant properties. The work involved traveling to potential acquisition targets, conducting thorough operational audits, and developing strategies for incorporating successful restaurants into the Meridian system while maintaining their unique appeal. My first assignment was a family-owned Italian restaurant in Detroit called Nana's Table. The owners, Michael and Rosa Benedetti, had built a beloved local institution over 30 years, but were struggling with rising costs and changing neighborhood demographics. They were considering selling to Meridian as their retirement strategy. Walking into Nana's Table felt like entering someone's home. The walls were covered with family photos, local newspaper clippings, and customer appreciation letters. The food was exceptional. Traditional recipes passed down through generations and executed with obvious love and pride. But the operations were inefficient. The kitchen layout forced unnecessary movement, increasing labor costs and service times. The menu was extensive, but many items shared expensive ingredients that weren't used frequently enough to justify their cost. The pricing hadn't been adjusted for inflation in years, creating razor-thin profit margins. We know we need help, Rosa admitted during our initial meeting, but we don't want to lose what makes this place special. Our customers come here because it feels like family. This was exactly the challenge I'd been trained for: how to improve efficiency and profitability without sacrificing the authentic character that made a restaurant successful. I spent 2 weeks at Nana's table, working every position from prep cook to server, analyzing every process and system. I timed kitchen operations, tracked ingredient usage, observed customer behavior patterns, and interviewed staff members about their challenges and suggestions. My recommendations were comprehensive but sensitive to the restaurant's culture. Kitchen redesign would reduce labor costs by 20% while improving food quality through better workflow. Menu engineering would eliminate unprofitable items while highlighting signature dishes that showcase the Benedetti family's culinary traditions. Staff training would improve service consistency without losing the warm, personal touch that customers loved. Most importantly, I proposed a pricing strategy that reflected the true value of the experience while remaining accessible to the loyal customer base. You understand something that other consultants missed, Michael told me after reviewing my report. You see that we're not just selling food, we're selling family, tradition, community. Your suggestions make us more profitable without making us less ourselves. The Benedetti acquisition became a model for Meridian's approach to integrating family restaurants. Nana's Table maintained its authentic character while achieving 40% profit improvement in the first year after integration. Vincent was impressed. "You've found your niche," he told me during my performance review. "You have the rare ability to improve operations while preserving brand authenticity. That's exactly what we need as we expand into new markets." Over the following months, I worked on acquisitions across the Midwest: a barbecue joint in Kansas City, a seafood restaurant in Minneapolis, a farm-to-table bistro in Madison. Each project taught me something new about business strategy, operational optimization, and the delicate balance between efficiency and character. The work was challenging and rewarding, but it was also isolating. I was traveling constantly, living in hotels, eating most meals alone. My contact with Chicago friends dwindled, and family relationships remained strained. Dad's attitude hadn't changed. He still viewed my success as temporary, waiting for me to come back to reality. During one of my rare visits home, Emma mentioned that several people had been asking about me. "Mrs. Patterson from down the street saw an article about that restaurant you helped in Detroit," she said. "She wanted to know if you were the same Madison Clark from the neighborhood." "What did you tell her?" "That you were working for some restaurant company. Dad told her you were basically still waitressing, just in different cities." The comment stung, but it also crystallized something I'd been feeling for months. Success within Meridian was satisfying, but it wasn't enough. Working to improve other people's restaurants, no matter how successfully, still meant I was essentially an employee. I was good at my job, respected by colleagues, and well compensated, but I wasn't building something of my own. Late one night in a Cleveland hotel room, reviewing financial projections for another potential acquisition, I realized what I really wanted. I didn't just want to improve restaurants. I wanted to create one, not just manage someone else's vision, but build something entirely my own. The idea that had been percolating since my training program presentation was growing stronger. Summit and Maine hadn't been just an academic exercise. It was a vision of what the restaurant industry could become. And I now had the experience, connections, and credibility to make it real. But first, I needed to finish what I'd started at Meridian. And I needed a plan that would take me beyond anything Dad could dismiss as just waitressing. The breakthrough came during a rainy Tuesday in Columbus, Ohio. I was evaluating a struggling steakhouse called Porter & Gray when the owner, Daniel Porter, made an offhand comment that changed everything. "You know what kills me?" he said as we reviewed his declining sales figures. "I've got this prime location, established customer base, experienced staff. But I'm hemorrhaging money because I can't adapt fast enough to what customers want now. They want quality and speed. They want personal service and efficiency. They want upscale experience at reasonable prices. It's like they want 3 different restaurants in one." That's when it hit me. The Summit and Maine concept I developed during training wasn't just an academic exercise. It was the solution to exactly the problem Daniel was describing. And after 18 months of studying successful and failing restaurants across the Midwest, I finally understood how to execute it properly. I spent the next 3 weeks developing a comprehensive business plan, not for Meridian, but for myself. Using everything I'd learned about market analysis, financial modeling, and operational design, I created a roadmap for launching my own restaurant concept. The numbers were sobering. Initial investment would require approximately $800,000 for location lease, renovation, equipment, inventory, and operating capital for the first year. I had savings from my Meridian salary, but nowhere near enough to self-fund the venture. I needed investors. More specifically, I needed investors who understood the restaurant industry and could provide not just capital, but expertise and connections. Vincent Morrison was the obvious first choice. I requested a meeting, ostensibly to discuss my career development within Meridian. We met at his office on a Friday afternoon, city lights beginning to twinkle below his windows. I've been thinking about my long-term goals, I began carefully. The acquisitions work has been an incredible experience, but I'm interested in exploring entrepreneurial opportunities. Vincent leaned back in his chair. You want to start your own restaurant? It wasn't a question. He'd seen the ambition in my work, the way I approached every project as if I were the owner rather than a consultant. Yes, I said, but not just any restaurant. I want to create something that addresses the fundamental challenges we see in every acquisition, the inability to serve multiple customer segments efficiently while maintaining quality and profitability. I presented my refined Summit and Main concept, complete with detailed financial projections, market analysis, and operational specifications. Vincent listened intently, occasionally asking probing questions about scalability, competition, and risk mitigation. The concept is sound, he said after I finished, and you have the operational expertise to execute it. But restaurant startups have an 80% failure rate in the first 5 years. What makes you think you can beat those odds? Because I understand both sides of the equation, I replied. I've worked front-of-house operations since I was 16. I know what customers want and how service teams function. But I've also learned sophisticated business analysis, financial management, and strategic planning. Most restaurant entrepreneurs are strong on one side or the other, rarely both. Vincent was quiet for several minutes, reviewing my projections and concept drawings. If I were to consider investing, he said finally, I'd want significant involvement in strategic decisions. This wouldn't be passive investment. It would be active partnership. My heart raced. Vincent Morrison wanted to partner with me. What kind of involvement? I asked. Board position, monthly strategic reviews, approval rights on major decisions. You'd maintain operational control, but I'd want input on expansion plans, capital allocation, and key hiring decisions. We spent the next hour discussing partnership terms, investment levels, and success metrics. By the time I left his office, we had the framework for a deal that would provide $600,000 in initial funding, plus Vincent's industry expertise and connections. But I still needed additional capital and local market knowledge. Chicago would be my launch market, which meant I needed Chicago investors who understood the competitive landscape. Through Patricia's catering network, I arranged meetings with several potential investors. Most were politely skeptical. A 24-year-old woman with no college degree and no direct restaurant management experience was a risky bet, regardless of her corporate training. The exception was Elena Rodriguez, a successful real estate developer who had built and sold several restaurant properties. She was intrigued by my operational background and impressed by Vincent's involvement. I like the concept, she said after our second meeting. And I like that you've actually worked in restaurants, not just studied them. But I want to see proof of concept before committing significant capital. Elena proposed a different approach. Instead of opening a full restaurant immediately, I should test the Summit and Main concept through a smaller pilot program. She owned a struggling cafe in Lincoln Park that could serve as a testing ground for my flexible service model and operational systems. 6 months, she offered. Turn around Cafe Luna using your methods. If you can prove the concept works on a smaller scale, I'll fund the full restaurant launch. Cafe Luna was a cautionary tale about good intentions without business acumen. The previous owner had focused on fair trade coffee and organic pastries while ignoring basic operational efficiency. The result was a charming space with terrible service times, inconsistent quality, and mounting losses. Perfect for testing my theories about operational optimization. I took a leave of absence from Meridian and threw myself into transforming Café Luna. The challenge was implementing restaurant-level systems and service standards in a casual cafe environment. I redesigned the kitchen workflow to reduce order preparation time by 40%. I created modular menu items that could be assembled quickly for grab-and-go customers or plated more attractively for dine-in service. I implemented point-of-sale technology that tracked customer preferences and optimized inventory management. Most importantly, I trained the staff to read customer cues and adjust service accordingly. Business professionals rushing in for morning coffee got efficient, friendly service focused on speed. Afternoon customers settling in with laptops received more relaxed, personal attention. The transformation was dramatic. Within 8 weeks, average service time had decreased from 12 minutes to 4 minutes for takeout orders, while customer satisfaction scores increased significantly. Daily revenue grew by 60%, and profit margins improved even more dramatically due to operational efficiencies. Local food bloggers began noticing the changes. Chicago Tribune's dining critic wrote a glowing review praising Café Luna's seamless blend of efficiency and hospitality and calling it a model for how casual dining should evolve. Elena was convinced. "You've proved the concept works," she said after reviewing the 3-month financial results. "I'm ready to fund Summit and Maine." With Elena's investment commitment and Vincent's partnership secured, I began searching for the perfect location. I needed a space that could support both quick lunch service and relaxed dinner dining, with enough square footage for the flexible kitchen design and technology infrastructure. I found it in River North, a former art gallery with soaring ceilings, excellent street visibility, and flexible floor plan possibilities. The lease terms were aggressive, but the location was ideal for attracting both business lunch crowds and evening diners. Construction began in February. I managed every detail personally, from kitchen equipment specifications to lighting design to staff hiring protocols. The build-out took 4 months and came in slightly over budget, but the result exceeded my vision. Summit in Maine opened on a Tuesday in June with minimal fanfare. I wanted to test systems and train staff before generating significant publicity. But word spread quickly through the business community about the new restaurant that somehow delivered gourmet lunch service in under 30 minutes, while maintaining full-service dinner quality. The lunch crowd embraced the efficiency model immediately. Pre-ordering through our mobile app, guaranteed service times, and consistently excellent food quality made Summit and Maine the preferred destination for business meetings and quick professional lunches. Evening service required more refinement. Slowing down the pace while maintaining operational efficiency was more challenging than I'd anticipated. But within a month, we'd found the right balance. Attentive service that felt relaxed rather than rushed, with food presentation that emphasized the artistry behind our efficient systems. 3 months after opening, Summit and Maine was fully booked most evenings and had a waiting list for prime lunch slots. Food critics were taking notice, and industry publications were writing case studies about our operational innovations. The financial performance exceeded projections. We were profitable within 6 months, almost unheard of for a new restaurant. More importantly, the concept was proving scalable. Other cities were inquiring about franchise opportunities. But the real validation came from an unexpected source. Jake called me on a Thursday evening in September. "Madison, I need to tell you something. Dad's been following what you're doing. He doesn't talk about it much, but Mom says he's been collecting newspaper articles about your restaurant." I was surprised. "He has?" "Yeah. And yesterday, his buddy Tony from the mill mentioned that his wife had lunch at your place. She was raving about the food and service. Dad got really quiet when she said the owner was some young woman who'd revolutionized restaurant operations." "Did Tony's wife mention my name?" "No, but Dad looked it up afterward. Mom found him reading about Summit in Maine on his phone." For the first time since I'd left for Milwaukee, I wondered if Dad was beginning to see me differently. Not as the stubborn daughter who thought she was better than her family, but as someone who had actually accomplished something significant. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. I'd spent years working toward this moment. The proof that I was more than just a waitress, more than the limitations he'd placed on my potential. But I wasn't ready for that confrontation yet. Summit in Maine was successful, but it was still just one restaurant. Dad would find ways to minimize the achievement, to reduce it to luck or temporary success. I needed something bigger, something undeniable. That's when Vincent called with an opportunity that would change everything. Vincent's call came on a crisp October morning as I was reviewing expansion plans for Summit in Maine's second location. His voice carried an excitement I'd rarely heard during our business dealings. "Madison, I just got off the phone with the Culinary Institute of America. They want to feature Summit in Maine as a case study in their restaurant management program. But more importantly, they're hosting their annual Industry Innovation Summit next month, and they want you as the keynote speaker." The Culinary Institute of America's Innovation Summit was the restaurant industry's most prestigious conference. Previous keynote speakers included celebrity chefs, Fortune 500 food executives, and legendary hospitality entrepreneurs. The invitation was a recognition that Summit and Maine represented something genuinely revolutionary in restaurant operations. "The theme this year is redefining service excellence," Vincent continued. "They specifically mentioned your work bridging efficiency and hospitality as exactly the kind of innovation the industry needs to study." I accepted immediately, but the invitation carried deeper significance than professional recognition. The summit would be held in Chicago at the Meridian Heights Hotel, the same venue where Meridian Restaurant Group hosted their annual board dinner. 3 weeks before the summit, Elena Rodriguez presented me with an opportunity that would expand Summit in Maine beyond anything I'd imagined. "I've been approached by investors from New York and Los Angeles," she said during our monthly strategic meeting. "They want to discuss franchise opportunities for Summit in Maine. We're talking about potential expansion into 15 markets over the next 3 years." The franchise proposal was stunning in scope: major metropolitan markets, prime locations, experienced operators who understood the hospitality industry. The financial projections showed potential revenue growth that would make Summit in Maine a regional powerhouse within 5 years. But franchising meant relinquishing direct control over operations, trusting other people to execute the systems and standards that made the concept successful. It was a massive leap from running one restaurant to building a restaurant empire. "What's your instinct?" Elena asked. "That we need to prove sustainability before we scale," I replied. "One successful restaurant is promising. Consistent success across multiple locations is a business model." Quote, "We agreed to start with 3 company-owned locations in Chicago suburbs, testing our ability to maintain quality and efficiency across multiple sites before considering franchise partnerships. The expansion planning consumed most of my time leading up to the Innovation Summit: site selection, staff training protocols, supply chain optimization for multiple locations. Every decision had implications for long-term scalability. Meanwhile, Summit in Maine's reputation continued growing. James Beard Foundation nominated us for Outstanding Service, and Restaurant Business Magazine featured our operational innovations on their cover. More importantly, reservation books stayed full, and customer satisfaction scores remained consistently high. The success felt surreal sometimes. 3 years earlier, I'd been serving coffee at Rosie's Diner, while Dad dismissed my business school aspirations. Now, industry leaders were studying my operational methods and inviting me to share insights with the next generation of restaurant professionals. But personal relationships remained complicated. Emma had visited Summit in Maine several times, bringing friends and posting Instagram photos of our signature dishes. She seemed genuinely proud of my success, though she still couldn't quite believe her sister had built something so sophisticated. Jake remained supportive but distant. His wife had given birth to their second child, and he was working overtime at the mill to support his growing family. We rarely spoke beyond holiday gatherings and brief text message exchanges. Mom called occasionally, usually when Dad wasn't home. She'd ask about the restaurant, my health, whether I was happy, but she never mentioned Dad's reaction to my success, and I never asked directly. The silence from Dad himself was deafening. No congratulations, no acknowledgement, no criticism. It was as if my achievements existed in a parallel universe that didn't affect his world. That changed the week before the Innovation Summit. I was at Summit in Maine late Tuesday evening, reviewing final preparations for our newest location's opening, when Marcus Chen called from Milwaukee. He'd left Meridian 6 months earlier to start his own consulting firm and remained one of my closest friends from the training program. "Madison, I just heard something interesting," he said. "My buddy who works in Meridian's corporate dining room mentioned that your father made a reservation for the Innovation Summit dinner. Apparently, he's coming as someone's guest." My stomach dropped. "My father is coming to the summit?" "That's what I heard. Reservation under Robert Clark for the networking dinner Thursday night. Same night as your keynote address." I sat in my empty restaurant, surrounded by the success I'd built, and felt like a 16-year-old girl again. Why was Dad coming? Was he finally ready to acknowledge what I'd accomplished? Or was he planning some kind of confrontation that would humiliate me in front of industry leaders? I called Jake immediately. "Did you know Dad was coming to my keynote speech?" I asked without a preamble. "What? No. He didn't mention anything about that. Marcus says he has a reservation for the networking dinner." Jake was quiet for a moment. "Madison, I don't know what he's planning. But maybe this is his way of trying to understand what you've accomplished. He's been different lately. Quieter. Mom says he's been asking questions about your restaurant, about the articles in the papers." "What kind of questions?" "How the business works, whether you own it outright, how many people you employ, stuff like that." Thursday arrived with unseasonable warmth for November in Chicago. The Innovation Summit was held at Meridian Heights, the same upscale hotel where I'd served countless corporate events during my catering days with Patricia. Walking through the lobby in my tailored business suit, carrying my keynote presentation, I marveled at how much had changed. The conference sessions throughout the day were energizing. I participated in panel discussions about operational efficiency, mentored young entrepreneurs during networking breaks, and connected with investors interested in restaurant technology innovations. The industry recognition felt validating and inspiring. But I couldn't shake my nervousness about the evening keynote and the possibility of seeing Dad in the audience. At 6 o'clock, I retreated to my hotel room to review my speech and change into evening attire. The presentation focused on redefining service excellence through operational innovation, using Summit and Maine as a case study for balancing efficiency with hospitality. I'd rehearsed the speech dozens of times, but tonight felt different. This wasn't just about sharing business insights with industry professionals. This was about articulating the vision that had driven me from Rosie's Diner to this moment, the belief that service work could be elevated through intelligence, innovation, and respect for both customers and employees. The networking reception began at 7 with the keynote presentation scheduled for 8:30. I arrived early to test the audiovisual equipment and settle my nerves. The ballroom was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline, elegant table settings for 300 guests. Many faces were familiar from industry conferences and business meetings. Others were new, young entrepreneurs, established restaurateurs, culinary school students. And in the back corner, looking uncomfortable in an ill-fitting suit, was my father. He was standing alone near the bar, scanning the room with obvious uncertainty. He looked older than I remembered, grayer around the temples, but his posture still carried the stubborn pride that had defined so many of our arguments. I approached him slowly, my heart hammering. "Dad." He turned, and for a moment his expression was unguarded. Surprise, nervousness, something that might have been pride. Then his familiar defensive mask returned. "Madison." We stood facing each other in the elegant ballroom, surrounded by conversations about market trends and operational strategies. Two people who'd spent years talking past each other. "How did you get an invitation?" I asked. "Vincent Morrison," he said quietly. "He called me last week, said there was something I needed to see." I was stunned. Vincent had never mentioned contacting my family. "He told me about this speech you're giving," Dad continued, "about how you've built something important. Said I should hear it myself instead of reading about it in newspapers." "And you came." "I came." Before I could respond, Vincent appeared beside us. "Robert, I'm glad you made it," he said, shaking Dad's hand. Madison, your father and I had a very interesting conversation about your journey from Meridian trainee to restaurant owner. Dad looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. He told me about the consulting work, the acquisitions, the business plan you developed. Said you'd become one of the most promising restaurant operators he'd ever worked with. The announcement chimed for guests to take their seats for dinner, and the keynote presentation. Vincent guided us toward a table near the front, where Elena Rodriguez and several other investors were already seated. During dinner, Dad remained mostly quiet, listening to conversations about industry trends, market expansion, and operational innovations. I watched him absorbing the sophisticated business discussions, the respectful way other professionals treated me, the obvious success Summit and Main represented. When the time came for my introduction, the conference organizer's words echoed through the ballroom. Our keynote speaker tonight represents a new generation of restaurant leaders who understand that true innovation comes from combining operational excellence with genuine hospitality. Please welcome Madison Clark, founder and CEO of Summit and Main. I stood at the podium looking out at 300 industry professionals and began the speech that would define how I wanted to be understood as a businesswoman and leader. 3 years ago, I was working as a server in a family diner, studying business magazines during my breaks and dreaming about what the restaurant industry could become. Tonight, I want to talk about how we can redefine service excellence by recognizing that efficiency and hospitality aren't opposing forces. They're complementary elements of exceptional customer experience. I spoke about the false choice between speed and quality, about operational systems that empower rather than constrain service teams, about respecting both customers and employees through intelligent design and genuine care. I shared the Summit and Main story, from concept development through pilot testing to successful expansion. I discussed specific innovations, modular menu design, flexible service protocols, technology integration that enhanced rather than replaced human interaction. But most importantly, I talked about dignity in service work. The restaurant industry employs millions of people in roles that require skill, intelligence, and emotional intelligence. Yet we often treat service positions as temporary way stations, rather than legitimate careers worthy of respect and professional development. Summit and Main succeeds because we recognize that exceptional service comes from empowered, knowledgeable, well-compensated teams who take pride in their work. Throughout the speech, I could see Dad in the audience, his expression gradually shifting from skepticism to something approaching amazement. When I finished, the standing ovation lasted nearly 3 minutes. Industry veterans approached afterward to discuss partnerships, investment opportunities, and consulting arrangements. The recognition was overwhelming and gratifying. But the moment that mattered most came when the crowd began dispersing and Dad approached the podium. "That was quite a speech," he said simply. "Did you understand it?" "More than I expected to." He paused, looking around the elegant ballroom, at the business cards, and congratulations still flowing my way. "Vincent explained some things to me about what you've built here. The numbers, the employees, the recognition you've earned. And I owe you an apology." The words hung between us. Years of misunderstanding and dismissal suddenly crystallized in that simple admission. "I thought I was protecting you," he continued. "From disappointment, from reaching too high and falling too hard. I'd seen too many people get their hopes up about things that never worked out. So you tried to keep my hopes small. I tried to keep your hopes realistic, but I was wrong about what was realistic for you." He looked directly at me, and for the first time in years, I saw no defensiveness or mockery in his expression. "You're not just a waitress, Madison. You never were just a waitress. You're a businesswoman, a leader, someone who's built something important. And I'm proud of you." The apology I'd wanted for years had finally come, but it felt different than I'd imagined. Not triumphant or vindictive, just sad that it had taken so long for us to understand each other. "I know you're proud, Dad. I just needed you to see me clearly." "I see you now." 6 months later, Summit and Main opened its 4th location, and franchise discussions progressed with operators in 6 additional markets. The business had evolved beyond a single restaurant success story into a scalable model for operational excellence in hospitality. Dad started visiting regularly, usually during lunch hours, when he could observe the efficient service systems I'd developed. He'd sit at the counter, watching the kitchen choreography and front-of-house coordination with obvious fascination. "It's like watching a machine," he told me after one visit, "but a machine made of people who actually care about what they're doing." Quote. The comment captured something essential about what I'd tried to build: systems that enhanced human capability rather than replacing human judgment, efficiency that served rather than constrained the goal of genuine hospitality. Mom began bringing her book club to Summit in Maine for their monthly meetings, proudly explaining to her friends how her daughter had, quote, revolutionized restaurant operations. Emma started working part-time as a server while finishing college, using her experience to understand business operations from the ground up. Even Jake expressed interest in learning about restaurant management, though he remained committed to his mill job and growing family. The relationships that had been strained by years of misunderstanding were slowly healing, built on mutual respect rather than old assumptions about potential and possibility. Vincent's partnership had evolved beyond financial investment into genuine mentorship and friendship. Elena's real estate expertise had become crucial for expansion planning. The network of relationships built through Meridian, the Innovation Summit, and Summit in Maine's success created opportunities I couldn't have imagined during my days at Rosie's Diner. But the most meaningful change was the simplest one. Dad had stopped seeing me as a waitress who didn't know her place and started seeing me as his daughter who had found her place, as a leader, innovator, and successful entrepreneur who happened to work in the restaurant industry. The VIP table reservation that night at Meridian Heights hadn't been about demonstrating wealth or status. It had been about proving that respect is earned through competence, vision, and persistence, and that service work, when elevated through intelligence and innovation, can be every bit as sophisticated as any other business endeavor. Standing in my restaurant now, watching efficient teams deliver exceptional experiences to satisfied customers, I realized that Dad had been both wrong and right about me. Wrong about my limitations, but right about the value of honest work done well. I was a waitress. I was also a CEO, entrepreneur, and industry innovator. The contradiction that had once seemed impossible to resolve had become the foundation of everything I'd built. And finally, everyone could see it clearly. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.